Welcome to Making Chassidus Real Part 7. Welcome back and apologies for the break. But hopefully we're going to try and continue now, at least on a weekly basis for a while, looking at ideas of Chassidus, taking a hashkafa of Chassidus and making it relevant, how it affects our hashkafa and how it affects our life. Just to recap a little bit from the stuff that we did before. We talked about Chassidus obviously presents a hashkafa, a way of looking at the life that changes the way we live and changes the way we serve Hashem. Sometimes it is true that Chassidus talks about madregish, which seem a little bit out of reach, and we get a little bit overwhelmed. But as we explained, first of all, the most important thing is to have the right cook, the right hashkafa. We have to remove what we call the moyach ha'evan. We at least have to have a starting point of having the correct mindset of Hashem and Torah and mitzvahs without diluting it, notwithstanding, despite what our own madrega might look like. We have to at least know in our mind what the correct thing to do, undiluted and completely authentic. And then of course we have to see every concept must have some relevance. Every concept obviously needs to change and have a little bit of a dent in the way we live our lives, and we need to obviously reflect on that to see how it's done. So today I want to look at something I hear often because it's part of a very modern discussion in modern day secular literature, but unfortunately seeping in, from what I could see sometimes in articles, even in frum circles, seeping into the Torah world, unfortunately, as we live in a tough world where distorted hashkafa often does seep in, and we have to be very careful. And this is the concept of self-care. People talk about self-care, setting boundaries, protecting myself, and so on and so forth. Now, let's just lay a foundation here. Of course, it's a mitzvah to take care of our health and well-being. True. We also know the Rabbi would often give us the hashkafa based on the Baal Shem Tov that we should not fast today because we shouldn't break the guf. Ozoiv, tazoiv, imoy, as the famous word goes. Not to break the guf, but to get the guf on board to serve Hashem as well, and so on and so forth. And that is a given, and that is obviously true. If someone has an issue, medically or emotionally, we obviously need to take care of it. But the question we have to ask ourselves really is this: what is the starting point? Because in modern literature and in secular literature, the starting point is self. But in Chassidus, we talked about bittul, focus on self, bechlal, is treif. Focus on self is an extremely negative thing. And it's true bittul, as we spoke about in a previous session, that really gives us the true potential to be connected to Hashem, really gives us the potential to be bli gvul and to go beyond ourselves and to serve Hashem and to grow. Just an example of this, for example, is in some of the Mamorim of Chav Cheshvan, which we just had, that the Rebbe brings from the Rebbe Rashav's Mamorim and so on, he deals with the concept of simcha. Each Maimon in a bit of a different way, just to quote something from Tovshin Yud Beis, it was printed in the Dvar Malchus this week, where he talks about the Yosfu Anovim B'Hashem, that simcha can only come through anova, humility, bittul. And the Rebbe asked the question, how is that so? Because one would imagine anova, humility, is sort of it's a tnua, it's an expression of self-contraction, in other words, you sort of retreat into yourself, whereas simcha is more about expansion and about broadness. And how do they go together? And the Rebbe explains that it's the other way around. True anova obviously is not about being negative to oneself, it's about understanding that we don't have a self, it's understanding that everything we have is from Hashem. When you understand that everything is from Hashem and everything is focused on Hashem and we're not focused on self, then we're not entitled. If we're not entitled, we can be truly besimcha. The Rebbe says when we start thinking that our talents and our skills and who we are, we start focusing on self, removing a little bit of the humility and bringing a little bit of yeshus into it, we become very entitled and we're never happy with anything. Because we always worried about self. And therefore the only way to be truly besimcha is to have bittul and stop focusing on self. When we stop focusing on self and everything's about Hashem, then simcha can happen and bli gvul can happen, and we have infinite potential and we can do much more. Bottom line, it's very clear from the teachings of Chassidus from so many places, obviously, that the tachlis of any Torah Jew, especially a Chossid, is really living a life of selflessness, a life where the focus is to do what Hashem wants and to fulfill the kavanah, a life of Mesiras Nefesh. In our tradition, in Chabad Chassidus, the Mesiras Nefesh is one of the most spoken about topics. And explored in different generations in different ways, and especially the generations where Chassidim gave up their life. They didn't worry about self. They gave up their life in order to do a mitzvah, in order not to be detached from Hashem at all. The Rebbe says in Shar Chinuch, there's printed letters from the Rebbe where he says it's important to tell children stories of Mesiras Nefesh. I often imagine, when I think about this concept of self-care and this focus on always making sure that we're protected and taken care of, I always think to myself, if the early shluchim that the Rebbe sent would have a focus of self-care, could you imagine what shlichus would look like today? The foundation of shlichus was laid by shluchim that the Rebbe sent and demanded an amazing amount from. Demanded selflessness, demanded they go away from their family, demanded hardship, demanded physical and spiritual hardship. Why? Because the Nakuda was, it's not about you, it's about the Kavanah. And the Rebbe demanded so much from his Chassidim, from Shluchim, and so on. One interesting thing that comes to mind is the last Sikha that we have recorded from the Rebbe that he spoke to the Kinus HaShluchim, which is coming up now. Parshas Chayesara, Tofshin Nun Beis, where he spoke the whole thing about what the Shlichus is, and L'Kabel Pnei Mashiach Tzedkeinu, and so on and so forth. And there's an interesting detail towards the end of the Sikha where the Rebbe reminds everyone, and he's talking to Shluchim, who are busy, who need to do lots of things, and to arrange lots of things. He reminds them that it's important to learn the Likutei Torah of the week. Marvi Sedra Likutei Torah is not an easy thing, and I'm not sure we all achieve it properly, but that's the mindset, that's the perspective. You're so busy. And of course, that's in addition to Chitas, Rambam, preferably 3 Prakim Rambam. There's a story of that's on video with Rav Adin Steinsaltz, Rav Evan Yisrael, who tells a story that he once wrote to the Rebbe, asking him what to do because he was involved in 3 very intense projects and he felt he just simply couldn't manage, couldn't cope. And what he was really asking the Rebbe is which one should he drop? Which one of those 3 projects? And typically, but he got this answer also, and he speaks about it, that the Rebbe answered him to add 1 more project. The Rebbe had very little patience for cutting down. So that's the mindset that we find coming from the Rebbe, the mindset we're coming from Chassidus, that a Chossid means that we don't focus on self too much. We don't take ourselves that seriously. The hashkafa, the outlook of Chassidus is that it's not about us altogether. Now, of course, about the kavanah. So the kavanah entails that we need to be healthy. And we do have answers from the Rebbe where the Rebbe would tell people to make sure they're not fasting, to make sure they're eating properly. I heard from Rabbi Grona, Olav Shalom, that he once traveled on some sort of Merkez Shlichus or something together with Rabbi Reichik. And the Rebbe Rabbi Reichik was a Chossid of note, daven, and just didn't care about his own gashmias, and the Rebbe told Rabbi Grona to make sure that he eats properly. Okay? Of course it has to happen. It's not kafiyah kavana to disregard and neglect our health. Obviously, we find private letters, private answers to the Rebbe, people that have issues, whether it's physical issues, whether it's emotional issues. Sometimes people have mental health crises, whatever the case is, obviously they need to get the right support, and obviously they need to take care of themselves. But the question we have to ask ourselves is, what is the starting point? Is the starting point self, or is the starting point bittul? The starting point is bittul. The Rebbe explains, and including this mimer in the Simcha, the Rebbe explains that when our starting point is bittul, then our scope becomes so much more. We're focused on doing so much more. We have greater potential. We're ready to give up comfort. We're ready to give up ourselves to do more and more. In that context, part of that bittul means that we have to be clever about it, and of course, don't do things that's going to harm us, so it'll undermine what we're doing for the Eibishter. But it's not about self. It's all part of the kavanah. But if the starting point is about self, which in the modern world it's very much about self, and my self needs, and myself this, myself that, then of course we limit ourselves, we become entitled, and we get ourselves locked into ourselves, being able to do very little and not being very happy, not being very besimcha. So I guess the takeaway from this is about, just wanted to sort of give a perspective because it's such a talked about topic today, that while it is important to make sure it's a mitzvah to take care of our health, but our starting point of a chassid has to be bittul. We have to read stories of Mesiras Nefesh. We have to read stories of chassidim who were totally ibri, like soldiers, like slaves to a master, as Chassidus says, an eved to an odin, and given over totally to the kavanah ha'elyona, because that's what a chassid really is. Now, are we all at that madrega? Are we all at the madrega of Mesiras Nefesh Chassidim? It wasn't Rush or not, but we have to at least develop that mindset and have it seep in and influence us, that we start taking ourselves a little bit less seriously and focusing more on the Eibishter's needs, the Eibishter's, not needs, or the Eibishter's kavanah, more than self. Have a great day and a wonderful week.